Hi, Mr. Berman. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Kammer, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out to be my second guest on my interview YouTube channel called Honestly Austin. Most people like TV shows and movies, so we thought it'd be interesting to have someone who produces them. Tell us a little about it.
Well, it's you're right. I do that. It's a lot of fun. Every day is a different day. It's a lot better than sitting in a cubicle somewhere, I think. Every day anything in a writer's brain ends up on paper in a script, and then we have to put it on film or tape or whatever. And it's a challenge. It's a lot harder work than I think a lot of people realize, but I have a great time doing it, and I've been doing it a long time now. So
Yep.
the white in my beard tells you how long.
Yep. All right. So let's start out with a little softball question. Tell us about where you grew up, what college you went to, and what or who inspired you to go into the TV and movie production.
Well, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and I've lived in Los Angeles now since about 1985 or six. So a long time. Uh, I went to University of Maryland for 2 years, and at the time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which I think is actually really important for kids these days to understand. You don't have to figure that out early on. Excuse me. And where you go to school almost doesn't even matter to some degree unless you're into specific fields and specific industry. Like being a doctor, you go to specific places. But in the TV and film industry, I think your entire life experience plays a role in your experience in the business. It helps you in many ways. So I went to Maryland for 2 years. I transferred to Ohio University, actually, where I graduated with a degree in communications, which is kind of a nice general degree to have. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a film degree or a TV degree or whatever to work in the industry. I know people that were lawyers that are now comedy writers. I know, you can have a philosophy degree and work in TV. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, all your life experiences play a role.
Mhm.
But I had a buddy. I was like in journalism, and I was thinking about law, actually pre-law, and things like that. And then I had a friend that went to school in Boston, and he came into LA, and he did an internship. And I thought an internship sounded like a great idea at the time. A way to get real experience as opposed to learning in a classroom. And came to LA, did an internship in uh, on a show a long time ago called Knots Landing. And when I finished that, I went back to school at Ohio, graduated in June, got in a car, drove out that summer, and never looked back. And 30 something years later, here I am still, and it goes so fast. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. So
Um,
when you first got to LA that first summer, and like when you ended up moving there, how did you find jobs and what jobs did you get?
um, it's really important, I think, in this industry as much as any. It's about who you know to some degree. And one of the reasons I really wanted to come, my parents wanted me to stay back in DC area in Maryland, and earn a little money before I came out. But I felt it was super important to use the contacts that I had, all three of them, I think, at the time, and come right back and start looking for work as soon as I could. So when I got here, and even before, I was reaching out to those people, and this is before email and stuff. So I was literally sending letters and making phone calls. And and I was looking for work. I was also looking for a place to stay. I didn't really have much money, sleeping on friends' floors where I could. I ended up in a fraternity house. I wasn't even a fraternity brother, but I ended up at UCLA in Westwood on the floor of somebody for that first summer. I lived in my car for a minute, like for 2 nights, I think, in somebody's bathroom floor once. And eventually, after calling a bunch of people, my first job was on a terrible movie called Tips. It was about life in a restaurant, and it had a lot of big names on it at the time. People like Phyllis Diller and Isabel Sanford, who was the wife on The Jeffersons. These are shows that you may not remember, but they were pretty popular at the time. Robert Culp was a big one. Um, had a lot of cool people in there. Barney Martin, who played Seinfeld's dad on Seinfeld. So I met a lot of cool people at the time, and I just started working. That was my first job. I was literally scrubbing floors and scrubbing toilets, getting ready for the crew to show up on location. And then they fired the production coordinator and asked me if I wanted to be the production coordinator. I didn't know what that meant really, but they paid me a little more. So I took the job and never looked back.
So when you were going around from place to place to stay and looking for jobs, was there a lot of rejection involved, and how did you handle it?
Um, I think you deal with that even when you first start out and even now. You don't always get jobs that you are hoping to, but there are a lot of factors that play a role. It's not necessarily about whether you're good at what you do. A lot of times it's just that people, the people that hire me now, studios and production executives, they have other people, they have responsibilities to help as well. It just depends. So it's like a lot of it's timing, luck, making sure you're in the right place at the right time, um, and stuff like that. So yeah, you're always dealing with rejection. Everything in our industry is finite, meaning it's not like an accountant job where you get a job at a company and you could be there for 45 years. Every project I take on is a movie or a TV show, and they run their course. So a film maybe you're working on for however many months, and then that's over. A season of a TV show can last anywhere from 3 4 months to a year. And if you do multiple seasons, if you're lucky to get a run like that, you can keep going for a while. But at the end of it all, at some point, everything ends. So
Yeah.
you're constantly looking for work. It's like freelance, more or less. And so you're constantly looking for work, and things don't always, break your way. So yeah, there's always some rejection, but it's typically not a matter of whether you're good or not. It's just timing
Mhm.
mostly.
So were there ever any TV shows or movies that you worked on that you thought were really going to hit big, but just never really made it?
Yeah, yeah, there's a couple. I worked on some that really were big. I mean, one of the first shows I worked on was a thing called Dallas with JR, and that whole thing with Larry Hagman. At the time, that was like the number one TV show on. That was about as popular as you can be worldwide. I worked on other shows that were successful, like iCarly. Again, in its genre, was probably the most popular TV show on at the time. There's some other shows. There was one, the sitcom, which is a multi-camera, using shooting with 4 cameras as opposed to one. The sitcom started to disappear a little bit back in the 90s, I'd say, and early 2000s. And there was a show that I worked on we did, I think, 13 episodes, called 20 Good Years. And that had John Lithgow and Jeffrey Tambor and some other people in that. And that we shot the pilot, and I remember that it was for NBC, and the network loved it so much. People were talking like, this is the return of the sitcom. It's going to lead the charge. And I think there was another show that came out around the same time called 30 Rock. And 30 Rock got a lot more play. And as good as our show was, and I still to this day feel like it was one of the best shows I've worked on in terms of sitcoms, it just faded away after the 13 episodes. I don't think they even aired all 13 ultimately, but the cast was phenomenal, and it really felt like it had legs, and it never had a real shot. There was another one actually that I always think about called Come to Papa. And there's a comic, he's still out there working. His name is Tom Papa. He's fantastic. He opens for Seinfeld a lot. And now he's got his own specials on HBO and everywhere. But we did a series called Come to Papa. And one of the sort of secondary stars of that was a guy named Steve Carell, and also an NBC show. And at the time, they were developing a show called The Office. And they more or less took Steve and pulled him from our show and put him on The Office. And that kind of was the end of that. But that was a great show too. It was so funny. It was one of the shows I laughed all the time at when I read the scripts at the beginning of the week. And I don't do that very often.
So you are a producer. Can you explain what a producer is, and can you also explain the differences between like an executive producer, like the head producer, and an assistant producer?
There's a lot of different types of producers, especially on television shows. If you watch the credits at the beginning in particular, it feels sometimes like they go on and on forever into the first act of the show. Um, what I have found is that many, if not most, of the producer credits you see, particularly at the beginning, they're writers. There's usually one executive producer, also gets a created by credit, and that is the person that has generally developed that project, that came up with the idea, that wrote it, sold it to the network, whatever. Um, and then the rest of them, supervising producers, coordinating producers, um, co-producers, co-executive producers, many of those are writers. There's also staff writers, but generally speaking, they're people that are dealing with the creative side. There's usually a line producer. That person often gets a credit, like it says produced by, and that would be what I do. I get the produced by credit, and I'm more about, I get brought in. I'm hired by the studio or the network or both, and also by that showrunner, the executive producer, who hopefully I've had a relationship with or am starting a new relationship with. I hire the crew. I help lay out the schedules, the budgets, deal with all the logistics of setting up the stages, deal with locations, really everything top to bottom, post-production, pre-production, production, scheduling, all of that. And then there are other producers, associate producers that could be help the production side, help me, or be in charge of the post-production. That's often where associate producers are. Um, and then there's assistant producers, but they're basically like, just executive assistant kind of people that help their staff, um, and that sort of thing. But that's generally how the producers break down in TV, at least.
Mhm. Are there any career-related choices that you wish you could have a do-over on?
It's an interesting question. I think everybody, you come, and I think this applies to any industry, as you work, you come to different forks in the road and you have to decide left or right. I don't really regret any of the turns I've taken along the way in my career. There was one time I was working at Warner Brothers early in my career, and they don't now, but at the time they had a whole camera department that serviced all the shows that they produced. And that camera department helped them get their equipment, all the cameras and the gear. They helped with the film because everybody was shooting on film at the time. They helped develop the film. At the end of the day, the film would get sent there to the dark rooms. They'd take care of that, process it, send it off to the post-production labs. So they did all that stuff. And at one time, I was offered the job of running that department, which would have, at the end of that run, I would have come out of it probably as a second assistant cameraman in the union. And had I done that, I would have worked camera on different projects going forward and could have worked my way up that ladder to be a cinematographer. And I think I love photography. That's one of the reasons I'm into this industry. But I think at the time I just decided I wanted to stay in the production side and follow that path that led me to becoming a producer overall. But I don't know that I necessarily regret it, but I think I would have really enjoyed being a DP or a director of photography or cinematographer had I gone that direction.
Mm. So you had the opportunity to work with David Spade, George Siegel, and like you said
Mm,
earlier, Steve Carell.
yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about each of them?
Uh, well, George, as you know, he just passed away recently. Um, and he was a pro. He had been doing it forever. He was a really sweet man. He understood the industry and how it works, and really wanted to enjoy himself and not deal with some of the peripheral BS. um, there was actually, here, hold on, I'm going to go off camera for 1 second. One advantage to being in my garage is that there's a ton of junk laying around. There was an episode of Just Shoot Me where I worked with David and George, and in that episode, George's, or the character Jack's ex-wife, keeps trying to steal a painting from his office that she lost, I guess, in the divorce. And one day, under some, I forget exactly how it goes, but it was a long time ago. But she pulls down or pulls something off of the painting to grab it. He had covered it up, and it turns out to be not the painting she was looking for, but this. And that's George Siegel thumbing his nose at his ex-wife. And I've had that image that came right off the set, and it's been in a lot of my offices over the years because I love it so much. He was a great guy, and I miss his laugh more than anything. And he would come out and entertain everybody playing banjo because he was a really good banjo player. But I mean, he's sort of like Hollywood royalty. David Spade, good dude, just he's around my age. He's a really, really nice guy. I think he grew up a lot on Just Shoot Me and learned a lot about acting. And I've always sort of regretted for him, like Adam Sandler, and I know they're really tight, but like Adam Sandler does comedy, but he also does more serious stuff too. And I've always felt, I don't know, David, if you're listening, I've always felt that he had the capacity for that as well. And I wish he would sort of explore that. And come to think of it, maybe I'll reach out to him and mention that. Steve Carell at the time, he was just starting out. He had just, I mean, he's done some stuff at that point, but this is before The Office and before he exploded. I remember having conversations with him. It was a short run, but again, just down to earth, really nice guy at the time.
Yeah. So, you produced several teen comedies on Nickelodeon, such as iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat, and Game Shakers. Can you tell us how you built a relationship with Nickelodeon?
I had been doing some other stuff, and when Dan Schneider was the executive producer and the creator of those shows, as well as ones that I didn't work on, things like Zoe 101, and all that. Although I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked out, but basically they were getting ready to do, I think, the final season of all that, which was season 10. And at the same time, we're starting, I want to say, Drake and Josh. So the producer at the time couldn't do both. So they brought me in to produce all that. So I did the final season of all that. And then there was a big reunion special. Keenan, Kel, everybody came back and did that. And like I said, you have to know people, you have to have relationships, develop relationships. Dan Schneider liked the work I did. He kept me around. After all that, I went away. I did some other stuff elsewhere. But then when they were finishing up Drake and Josh as a series, they were also starting up Zoe 101. So I came in and produced the last, I think, 6 episodes of Drake and Josh of the series. And then I went away again and did some stuff at Warner Brothers or wherever. And then I think when they were finishing up Zoe 101, and then there was a writer's strike, everything shut down, and they had done 1 season of iCarly, and coming back off the writer's strike, they needed more help. So they brought me in, and I produced iCarly for the rest of the run. So out of 7 seasons, I did 6. I did everything but the very first season. But then Victorious started up in the middle of that. And we kind of just went back and forth between the 2 shows, start up Victorious and did that. And I just kept going, after Victorious and iCarly finally kind of came to a close, then I ran on to Sam and Cat. And that was one very long season, about 35 episodes. And then Jeanette went off on her way, and Ariana Grande went on her direction. She was always about the music. And so she wanted to focus more on the music industry, which she's done quite well at. And then Game Shakers came along again, and I did other things in between here and there. But yeah, jumped onto Game Shakers, and that finished up at the end of 2018.
Cool. So, in general, how is it working with teen actors, and even more working with their parents?
Parents, different actors' parents, stage moms, stage dads, they're all interesting people. They're parents. They're supposedly and trying to look out for the best interests of their kids. Some do, some don't. Parents, like anybody else, they're just people, and the actors too. I think it's really important for kid actors, teen actors, and younger, whatever, for them to remember that it is a job, and they have to get their schooling in each day. We're required by child labor laws to provide school and do a lot of things, and they have limited hours they can work, that you schedule around to some degree. You can stagger calls and things like that to get the most out of everybody, but you have to really think ahead in terms of writing the scripts, how to schedule, how heavy to write an actor, especially when they're a minor, into each script, so that they're not in every scene top to bottom, because you'll never finish your schedule, given that they can only, if they're like 13, 14 years old, they can only work a total of 9.5 hours a day. So, if they're in every scene every day, you're never going to get all their school in, and you're never going to have them when you need them to shoot. So it's constantly dealing with that. But in terms of them, I think it's important for the child actors to remember, like I said, that it is a job. There are a lot of people there like me and other crew people that depend on them to be professional and try to know their lines as best they can and remember their marks, where they have to be within the scenes and stuff like that. It could probably feel a lot like theater fun and like a game at times, but it's a job. So they have to take it seriously and focus and do well in their school, hopefully, as well. Because a lot of these kid actors don't make it forever. They start young and they work in this industry, but then unfortunately, a lot of them get kind of spit out at the end and don't make it as adult actors. Some do, but it's less than most.
Yeah.
So it's good to have a good education and understand what else there is out there for them, sometimes in the industry and sometimes not.
So, do you ever feel that the teen actors are ever taken advantage on, either by the production companies or their parents, even?
Yeah, for sure. There's laws that exist today because of the way parents used to treat. Sometimes, the kids make all this money, and the parents would steal it, or take it or use it or whatever. Nowadays, there's the Coogan laws, which came about after a certain point, which means that most of the money that the kid makes is put in a trust, essentially, so that it's there for them later on. And parents can't just take it, throw it in the bank, and go crazy. So there's a lot of stuff like that. The hours that they work, it's determined by law. Ultimately, it's not up to the productions, but I think sometimes shows try and push the envelope a little bit too much, and you get in trouble with that at times. I think you have to, like I said, I think you have to plan ahead and write things in a way so that you avoid those situations.
Mhm.
But like I said, it's a grueling industry, whether you're adult or a child. So you just have to protect everybody, top to bottom, I think.
So, if your kids wanted to be child actors, would you let them? Do you think the environment's safe enough for them?
The short answer, I always tell people, if my children want to be, um, and by the way, I was going to say earlier, like one of the reasons do well, I did well on the kid shows too, is a little bit because I'm a parent. So I understand kids, I understand what they're up against. So it made me have that understanding a little bit. But yeah, I always say if my kids want to be in the TV industry or film industry, whether they're actors or not, I would say absolutely not, because it's ridiculous. There's long hours and it's crazy but realistically, if that's what they really want to do, I'm more than happy to um, help them find their way. And because I've been doing it so long, I know the right people. I can point them in the right direction, help them break in. But at the same time, I could also sort of help them avoid the pitfalls that a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So there's that. So yeah, I would absolutely support them. I mean, I would also make sure they go in with their eyes open and understand that it's a really tough business, that you're always looking for work. You have downtime. You have to prepare for that financially, because it just happens. Um, and that, just to watch out, all the things they should watch out for,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'd support them.
Mm. So, I know you're probably not allowed to name names here, but were there any people that you worked with that were kind of like prima donnas and hard to work with? And what characteristics made them so hard to work with?
Yes and no. I'm not going to name names, but yeah, I mean, there's people like that probably in every business. doesn't have to be in show business. But yeah, there were people that were really a challenge to work with. There are times when you bite your tongue. There's times when you suck it up and just turn away and walk away because you have to. But again, I think you find that everywhere. There's a lot of egos in every industry, certainly in show business. So you have to deal with that. But you just, if you're good at, and in my position, I have to understand people as a whole, and I always look at myself, try to be the at the center of the hurricane and be calm, because things go wrong inevitably, no matter what you do, how much I always try and prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Um, but you just learn how to manage people, I think. And I find myself in the middle of different situations all the time, like everything from just making sure people are being safe on stage, that they're following OSHA rules and following all the different things they have to do to do what they do safe. Because there's a lot of crazy gear we're on, everything from cranes and there's stunts and rigging and things where you're hanging lights, and there's a lot of possibilities for trouble and unsafe situations. So I have to be in the middle of that. But also, there's disagreements all the time. One department, the prop department, might be thinking they're taking care of this, when the set dressing department might be thinking they're taking care of the same thing, and they might be arguing about it. I have to step in and sort of determine who's better suited, and more importantly, who's supposed to be handling certain things. I have to delegate and really make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and hopefully staying in their lane. But whenever you get a lot of people together, there's bound to be some disagreements. And again, that's where I'm good, I think, at managing those, and managing the people, helping everybody work through their disagreements and still come out the other side liking each other and
Mhm.
working well together, hopefully.
Yeah. So obviously, with all that you've said, you obviously have a really busy schedule. So when when you when your kids were littler, like the 1 through 10 age, how
Yeah,
did you manage a work-life balance with them?
it was really difficult. Um, I think I think I got better at it the longer I did it. I and technology helped a little bit, in the olden days, not that long ago, but before we all had cell phones and things, a lot of times you kind of got stuck in the office and you just couldn't take off. Nowadays, with cell phones and computers and pagers, I mean, not so much pagers anymore, dating myself, but it allows you to break away and still function from afar. And I think I made it when the kids were growing up. I just made it a point, was to not always just hang out till the bitter end of the night. Depending on the situation. Some nights I just had to be there late. There's no way around it. But when the opportunity presents and I was able to break away and manage things from afar, I would just do it and go be with them. And it's a little bit of split attention, but at least I was there and functioning. And I think I've gotten a lot better at that. And you know, the kids, at the end of the day, my own family has to be priority number one. And I think when you're hungry and you're younger and looking for work all the time, you don't have that. Sometimes you don't have a family to worry about, but even when you do, it's still, you're starting out with the family and it's not always your first priority. But as you grow older, especially once you have kids, I think it changes you for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what changes do you envision in the future for the production of movies?
Wow. I don't, what? Part of the fun is I don't even know. And I've told a few people recently, like, I'm a little sad that I have to die one day because I want to see all the stuff that I'm going to miss out on. I mean, we're here for such a brief little moment, a flash of time. If you think about it, I don't want to get too deep here, um, but like, it bums me out. I won't actually see everyday people with flying cars like they all told us. I mean, they exist now, which is kind of cool, but when's that going to get big? I don't know. Um, in TV and film, every day there's new tech, there's new stuff coming up. If you watch some older shows and watch when they had, keyed out stuff like for blue screen and green screen, and you can kind of see where it happens today. Nowadays, with technology being what it is, it's so much more seamless. The driving shots is a perfect example. The plates, the film that they used behind the people in the car, now it looks so realistic. They're able to match and marry things so much more cleanly. There is I went to a demo about a year ago for this technology they're using, where they basically build a set out of screens, and they use gaming software to create an environment. So you could be out in the desert, in acting within a set that's maybe 25 feet by 20 feet deep, and it's 3 walls with a ceiling piece, and they can light using these screens from the ceiling or wherever, and not even have practical hanging lights. They can use the screens to do the lighting. They can change the look of things. If you don't like where this outcropping of the cliff is, they can literally go into a computer and move it to the other side. There's some amazing technology nowadays. I know they use that in Mandalorian and all these different things, but it's so cool. And you can change sets 90 seconds. They can cycle through it. Whereas if you're doing that on real locations, I mean, it's days. Time is money in any business. So technology is changing dramatically every day. And it's so cool to see where it's heading. So it's a lot of fun.
Mhm. So I want to end it off with this question. What advice would you give to someone trying to make it into the industry?
Um, the first thing I would say to especially a younger person, like let's say yourself or whatever, is what I said earlier. Don't worry so much about the degree you have. I think the more practical experience you get, the better. And if you're at a school, if you're determined to be in the TV and film industry, get practical experience, whether it's through internships or get in the studios at the schools. A lot of the schools now have great departments for that sort of thing. Get on the cameras, know how all these things work, get in the room where it happens, like they say kind of in Hamilton. That's number one. Don't over stress over your degree, because you can, any degree practically will apply, but as long as you're getting the practical experience one way or the other. And then just be determined, don't give up. A lot of people try to get into the industry and don't have immediate success, and they decide, oh, screw it, I'm going back home wherever I came from, and they start doing other things, and you see a lot of people drop off. But don't be discouraged. You just got to keep at it, keep making new contacts, learn everything you can, and keep pushing. And eventually you'll make it. There's a lot of different ways to get into the bit. There's no one, there's no, everybody's journey is different. And I can interview, I have a podcast I'm not going to talk about, but there is a podcast where I interview people within the industry, and I could interview 10 people who do the same job, and their stories are going to be completely different. And that's the beauty of it. There's no one way to get into TV and film. There's a million different ways. You just got to get out there and start doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right, Mr. Berman, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk about us.
Anytime,
And I might
Austin.
see your future projects.
Me too. I'm interested too. Thanks again, Austin. Appreciate having me on.